called him Old Borax. It had nothing to do with cleaning, but it turns out that it was an appropriate name. Talking about Dr. Harvey Wiley, who actually was a chemist, and he had been made chief chemist at the Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Chemistry in the US. That was in the 1880s. And he was very concerned about food adulteration because at that time, food processing was like the Old West. Anything went. If you wanted to put some sort of substance that you thought was a preservative into the food, you could do it. And he was dismayed that this was happening. He was adamant that the consumer should be protected. So he hatched a scheme. He had 12 young men, healthy, vigorous men, who came to be known as the Poison Squad, who would sit at a table and consume meals. And after the meal, they would get a capsule, and that capsule would have some sort of chemical that was being used at the time as a food additive. The very first one that he tested was borax. After he tested things like saccharin and sodium sulfite and sodium benzoate. But the very first one was borax, because at the time it was widely used as a preservative in meat, because it does have some effect on bacterial growth. Well, it turned out that some of the men got sick very quickly after they ate the borax. And this, of course, was very, very discouraging. They got sick after eating some of the other additives as well. Harvey Wiley was very serious about promoting this idea that there were potentially toxic substances being put into the food supply, and he gave a number of public lectures. And that got a lot of publicity and a lot of attention, eventually so much attention that it led to the 1906 passage of the first act in the US that had some kind of regulations about food, the Food and Drug Act of 1906. It didn't have many teeth, actually, but at least it stipulated that whatever additives were used in a food had to be listed on the label, although there were no additives that were banned at that time. Borax itself later on was banned as a preservative. Now, interestingly enough, it was banned later on because of its potential toxicity. If you consume too much borax, it can be a problem. But there was another issue here, a much more fundamental issue. And that is, while borax does retard the growth of some bacteria, the bacteria that it retards are the ones that are responsible for producing putrefaction and a bad smell in food, particularly in meat. And that is what would prevent you from eating that meat. But it does not have an effect on the disease-causing bacteria like E. coli. So indeed, by using borax as a preservative in food, it allowed people to eat food that otherwise they should not have eaten. So it's a good thing that eventually it was banned, but Wiley was against borax because of its toxicity, not because of this other issue that it allowed people to eat food that otherwise should have been discarded. And so we look back at Harvey Wiley as really a champion of preventing food adulteration. And indeed, the name that they used for him, Old Borax, was very appropriate because he did a lot of work on borax. And that for today is our Cup of Joe.